Hello and welcome along once again to It'll Be Alright in the 90s, the podcast whose compliance to Y2K policies is patchy at best. I'm Stu Millennium Prayer Joslin, and joining me as always is Millennium Alex Greenwood. Greenie, how are you this morning?
I'm very good. Yeah, it is the morning. We've gone for the Diet Coke 11:30, haven't we? Which is the first time I think we've ever recorded during the day, and I feel surprisingly fresh. And actually, it's not the first time ever, is it? I think maybe we did this. I'm getting sort of deja vu of doing this last Christmas, maybe. But
we spoke to Rob from Premiership Years in the morning, didn't we, over the summer?
Oh, that was it. Yeah. I remember. It was as soon as I said I felt fresh that I had this deja vu, because it's the second time I've ever felt fresh recording this podcast. But I'm good. Yeah, I'm ready for the new year. I do have one thing that I'd like for 2023. Stu, I don't know about you, but I would like more listeners, if that's possible.
Yeah, absolutely. All welcome. None should be turned away.
Yeah, and in all seriousness, I think it's the listeners who really make this what it is, and it's why we do it, or partly why we do it. And they really enhance everything we do with your correspondence and all that. So we would really love more for the party, basically, in 2023. So if you do enjoy listening to us, then yeah, tell your friends, get other people to get involved, and we'll make it even better for the next year.
Please do come and join our happy band. I thought we were going to leave the desperate pleas for more listeners until the end of the episode, but It's just good to do it up front.
Maybe we could just bleep all of that out.
No. We used the bleep machine to its full capacity with Dan over the last episode, so we've got no more use for the year. It's like, we only get a certain amount of time with the bleep machine per year.
It's still cooling down, and
we have to exactly, we have to save it. Well, depending on how you look at it, this is our last episode of 2022, or our first episode of 23, because we are going out at midnight on January the 1st with this one. It's our Y2K episode. So we thought we'd use the turn of the year to look back at the transition between the year 1999 and 2000, and the moment where we left behind the greatest decade that there ever was, the 90s, and stepped into a whole new decade, a whole new century, a whole new millennium. All that's to come, but first of all, of course, we do have to give a mention to our episode sponsor this time round. It's been a long time coming. I've been in negotiations with these guys for a long time. I'm pleased to say that our sponsor this time is AST Computers. We finally got them on board.
Good.
If you simply quote the code AllRight90s at the checkout at participating branches of Tandy, when purchasing any AST computer product, you'll receive 5% off of the list price. They're all guaranteed Y2K compliant as well. That's AST Computers, shirt sponsors of Aston Villa Football Club. So thanks very much to you guys over at AST for sorting us out with that.
Terrific work. I know you've been working hard on that as well, so well done for getting that across the line, and big sponsor for the pod to start the new year.
Yeah, I mean, to tie up with a major football club sponsor as well is absolutely superb for us. So yeah, really, really pleased to get that one over the line. Just one thing in the mailbag this time round. The postal strikes are affecting us all. I mean, hopefully there's loads and loads of correspondence that's been backed up in the system and is waiting to arrive here at It'll Be Alright in the 90s HQ. But we do, of course, stand with our brothers and sisters in the postal profession. And it's to do with the Argos episode that we released a few weeks back, and to do with the competition that I noted on the Seconda Watches page to enter and win a Peugeot 106. Mm-hmm. Regular correspondent Alex Mitchell got in touch to remind us that he owned a 1994 Peugeot 106 as his first car in that exact colour and trim. And he's now wondering where it came from. What was it, that Peugeot 106? Did somebody win it in that competition in the Argos catalogue? Then it got passed through various hands and ended up with Alex. He says it's a magnificent car. Shame I had to scrap it, but apparently it was a miracle the driver's seat hadn't fallen through the floor, as there was so much rust under there. So perhaps that's where the Seconda Prize Peugeot 106 ended up here on the roads of Wiltshire. I'd like to think it did. That would be absolutely fantastic, wouldn't it?
I think so. Yeah. That let's just pretend. Well, not pretend. Let's just assume it has. We'll never know for sure, but I think we can safely say that it's very likely that the Alex of the pod, the official Alex of the pod, does own that very Peugeot 106, or did own, I should say, before it rusted out beneath his very. But
I'm
Yeah.
sure because Alex owned it, and before that it was owned by another friend of ours, Phil. And I'm fairly sure that he said that before he had it, it had been impounded in some drug trade or something, and there'd been one of these ones where all the merchandise was in between the doors, and they'd taken the door frames out, and there was all packets of
Seconda watches.
Of Seconda watches in there.
Yeah.
That's it. Mystery solved. Finally. See, stick with us. We'll get to the bottom of these things eventually.
Yeah. I love it when we sort of get to the bottom of things as we're talking about it. It's like all the best detectives. We just have to talk these things out, and then the truth will emerge. I think that's the second car-related mystery we've solved, along with Legend of the Pod, Kate Pro's aunt, I think it was, who I can't remember exactly what. I think basically she stole a car, wasn't it?
That's
something
it.
like
Yeah,
that.
we got to the
Off
bottom
you,
of that. Yeah. It was the only conceivable outcome was that Kate Pro's aunt had stolen my blue Ford Fiesta. And we'll repeat that claim
until we're told not to.
Indeed.
By someone who has the authority to stop us. I don't have any correspondence myself, but I do have just a little update from the Christmas number ones episode that we did last time. I thought this was funny. When I upload our clips to YouTube, or our episodes to YouTube, I should say, if there's any music in it, sometimes they will get flagged by YouTube as a copyright issue, and I'll have to remove them, or it'll be okay because it won't affect us financially. But I was sort of relieved, I suppose, to notice that Mr. Blobby, I think is the name of the song, isn't it, Mr. Blobby?
Yeah.
The Christmas number one from 1994, I think it was. No, 93, was not only not a copyright issue, but it actually wasn't even recognised as a song. So YouTube is very much on our side, I think, in regards to considering that quite a lowly piece of art from the 90s. So that was a relief, I think, and quite comforting to know that YouTube also doesn't consider it music.
Well, yeah, a relief in one sense, but quite surprising in another, because I would have thought that Edmonds would have been all over that, wanting his pieces of silver.
Yeah, that's true.
Here is a man who bought a second-hand London taxi so that he could drive in bus lanes legally.
That's
true. So you would think that he would want a few pence off of us for playing Mr. Blobby out on the pod. But then again, has he got a writing credit? Is he like Jesus with the Millennium Prayer? Is he on the list?
Yeah, well,
so
maybe not. Or maybe it's just he wanted that. But if you don't write something, or if the song you write is so bad it doesn't even get picked up as music, then that's your problem, isn't it? Time now for our regular feature, What's the Most 90s? And today, Stu, I'm going to ask you what the most 90s fitness fad is or was.
As I've said many times, when I think about these things and the questions that you pose me, I quite often go with the first thing that I think of when you ask me the question, because that's quite often the right answer, or it's the right answer for me at least. Of course, there is no right answer with these things. But my what's the most 90s fitness fad is aerobics. So my mum used to go to aerobics regularly when I was very young. I remember her having all sorts of videotapes by people like Rosemary Conley. I don't know if you remember her. No. She was like a TV fitness person, very much in the Mr. Motivator vein, but maybe a little bit gentler than Mr. Motivator was, if you see what I mean. Yeah, I don't know when she stopped, but obviously she did, and it seems to have been replaced, or not replaced, but it's now packaged as things like boxercise and jazzercise and classes like that, where it's movement set to music. And you don't really hear about anybody going to aerobics anymore. Water aerobics, maybe. I'm not sure if that even exists anymore. But yeah, I don't really have a lot to say about aerobics. Other than I knew that it was a big thing in the 90s. My mum used to do it, and that was where my mind went. So yeah, I'll pick aerobics, please.
Nice, yeah. I think you're spot on there. Actually, you don't hear about people going to aerobics, do you? Unless it's just an older generation who have continued to do it from that era. But you don't see classes advertised for that.
No.
So that's a good point. And my answer is actually basically the same, but I've gone for specifically step aerobics, and even more specifically the Reebok Step, which is a product sold for people to do step aerobics in their own home. And I just remember this being a really big thing for a bit, and I suppose I would see the adverts and see them in the Argos catalogue and whatnot. And I remember even when I was a kid, because I would have been single figures age wise, And I remember thinking even then that I can't believe they're making money out of that. That is just something that is 3 inches off the ground that you step up on and step off. How they make that, you could use some house bricks for that. How are they making money from it? But apparently it was huge, and you can still buy them. I looked, you can still buy a Reebok Step online, and yeah, I looked it up on Wikipedia, and apparently the year 1995 was the peak of step aerobics with 11.4 million practitioners. How they counted that, I have no idea, but there you go. And I did find a really good advert from 1991 for the Reebok Step, which maybe we'll insert a clip of here, but it depicts a couple of people sort of running up the side of this pyramid in Central America or something, intercut with images of people on a Reebok Step Up, which I think is a bit of a tenuous sort of link between those two things.
Yeah.
But it also says in the voiceover for that advert, it's been called the toughest workout on earth. Has it though? By who? By Reebok, do you think? Someone in the Reebok marketing department? Because I can't believe stepping up 5 inches and back down again is the toughest workout on earth.
It's been called the toughest workout on earth. Step Reebok. Nobody can make you do it. You just have to be one of those people who believes that hard work will be rewarded. So cool.
There you go. It was big in the 90s for sure, and yeah, that's why I chose it, the Reebok Step and Step Aerobics.
The band I'm in, we rehearse in a room which is also used as a gym. It's a long story, but I'm almost 100% sure there is a Reebok Step in our rehearsal room, and it probably comes under the umbrella of CrossFit now. Probably there's a bit of stepping going on there. But yeah, I mean, it is literally money for old rope, isn't it? You get a box that comes 3 inches off the ground, you write Reebok on it, and you sell it for 40 quid. I mean, it's brilliant. It's genius. Also, what happened to those? Do you still get those tiny little trampolines, like the one person trampoline?
Yeah, do you get them? Because I kind of thought they were for children, but actually they're not, are they? They are. You get them in gyms and stuff. What's that all about? No, I don't know.
I really don't know. I've never found out.
Maybe there's probably one too many claims in the small claims court of them for them to still be around.
Possibly, yeah. You go into a room and there's just a body sticking out of one of those suspended ceilings with somebody's head on for it. Okay, so aerobics in general, then, I would say, goes into the ledger as our most 90s fitness fad.
Nice.
Well, it's the end of another year, and what better subject to discuss on the podcast at this time of year than the turn of the year 2000. We obviously discuss everything that happened in the 90s in detail on this podcast, but we've never taken the opportunity to discuss the moment that the 90s ended and we stepped into the 2000s. So, yeah, it's the lead up to and what happened on the 31st of December, 1999, and maybe a little bit afterwards as well. We'll see where we get to. So I guess what I want to ask first, Alex, and sort of get us into the subject is, where were you and what were you doing on the 31st of December, 1999? How old were you, first of all?
I would have been 15 and a half.
Okay, righto. So you're right at that age where you're probably not wanting to be with the family and you're wanting to be with your friends instead.
I was right on that sort of crossover period because I was with my family. Well, I was with my parents. My brother would have been, he would have been 18 or 19, so he would have been out somewhere else. Whereas I was not quite old enough to go out on my own. Not out anyway. I could go around to someone's house, but we didn't do that. So I was with my parents, but I was at an awkward age where I guess I was sort of happy to be with them-ish, but I kind of felt a bit awkward because we went out to Bath. It was like you had to do something, didn't you? Because it was so big. There was this sort of feeling of, what are we going to do? Because it's the turn of the millennium. You can't just stay in and watch the Hootenanny because it's the turn of the millennium. Like even Jules wouldn't be doing that. So
well, no, Jules wouldn't have been there anyway because, as we know, he records it in the middle of September. So that's all done and dusted. He's out enjoying himself anyway.
Oh, I don't know. Do you not reckon he just stays at home and watches himself over? I think he watches the Hootenanny. That's why he records it early, so he can sit down and watch it with a glass of red. But yeah, so we decided let's just go into Bath and sort of mill around, see what's going on. And I remember driving into Bath and sort of, like I say, feeling a bit awkward because there were lots of revelers around, lots of young people, and I was sort of with my parents, didn't quite know what to do, and we just walked around for a bit from what I can remember. and I don't even know if we stayed there till midnight. The only thing that I can really remember is coming back to the car, which we parked in Victoria Park, which, for anyone who doesn't know, is the sort of the main park in Bath, in the centre, and going back to the car. And then as we were leaving the park, my dad saw a group of young people looking very dodgily. I'm not sure if they were actually trying to get into a car or were just sort of surrounding it, looking very much like they were going to. And I remember my dad slowing right down and just crawling past them and staring them out. And I was thinking, I just wanted him to go, because I guess I was sort of awkward and also slightly nervous. I was like, what are you doing? Let's just drive. But he was like, no, they're up to something. I'm just going to, drive past very slowly. And then I guess they just left or ran off or something. And then we drove away. And that's the only real memory I have of Millennium Eve, is going into Bath, not really having anything going on, and then that slightly odd moment when we left, and that's it really. I don't remember midnight or anything. Yeah, so it was a bit of a non-event for us. What about you?
Well, if I was going to guess what you were up to on Millennium Eve, I wouldn't have said getting involved in inner city crime.
Vigilantism.
It wouldn't have been high on my list. So I'm a couple of years younger than yourself. So I was 11. I just had my 11th birthday. I was in year 6 at primary school, and we were where we always were at festive times of the year at that time, which was at my nan's house. So all the family would have been there. And I remember my mum had bought these, the novelty glasses.
Yes.
So we had 2,000 glasses, but obviously the middle 2 zeros were the eyes, and then you had the 2 and another 0 there. Yeah. I remember that quite clearly. That was it really. The family was round. It was a convivial time. We watched pretty much everything on TV. I remember the River of Fire pyrotechnic thing along the Thames, which didn't quite work out the way it was supposed to.
I don't really remember.
I don't suppose you would have seen it because you were out. Bob Geldof apparently was behind the company who arranged all of these pyrotechnics, so we can blame him. One of the other things I remember about that Christmas holiday from 99 going into 2000 was that my teacher had seen fit, or the year 6 teachers, I should say, at my primary school, had seen fit to make us all do a huge science project over the break. The likes and scale of which we hadn't seen before as primary school students. We had to produce like 10 pages on a certain subject. And I remember being sent home with a letter detailing what we had to do and when it had to be in by. The closing line of the letter, it was something like, Merry Christmas to you all. Maybe Santa will bring you a science book or two to help you out with this.
Oh,
and I remember my mum reading the letter and actually being quite annoyed, saying they're making all these kids doing this huge science project over the Millennium Christmas holiday, and then they're putting in snide jokes like that.
Yeah.
So no, my mum wasn't very happy with that. But yeah, it was just a family time. I suppose I was too young then to be doing anything else really, apart from being with my family. I'm not even sure I had a mobile phone at that point. So I wasn't even texting friends or anything, or phoning friends. I was literally just with my family. But I was happy enough. I used to enjoy those. I used to enjoy those holidays very much, and I was more than happy with that.
I think that's fair enough. What is the best you could do on New Millennium Eve? Really, it's the same with all New Year's Eves. Really, you kind of think, well, it's a big thing because it's New Year's Eve, and you go out and maybe you go to the pub, but it's not really that different to any other night out, other than the fact that you at one point all start counting down and cheer. You might get a peck on the cheek or something from a friend or a partner, but I mean, Christ, that's it. It's no real different. So I guess it's not that surprising. I'd love to know what our listeners did. If you are listening, do let us know if you did something wild or completely out of character. But yeah, it's just one of those things, I think.
Please let us know. Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to let you in on something now, mate, just between me and you.
Okay.
And seeing as we've already established at the top, there's nobody else listening, so I feel confident in letting you know this. New Year's Eve, I'm not a huge fan anyway.
Oof. Okay. I would say that's actually becoming more and more of a common opinion. But have you found yourself getting grief for revealing that before? Well,
I should say that this is as an adult. So I've just said what a great time I used to have with my family on Christmases and New Year's, and that is true. But as an adult, I just find that it's as you say, it's not much different to any other night out. Obviously, being a part-time musician as well, I play most New Year's Eves. I'm not doing it this year, but I'd say 8 out of the last 10 New Year's Eves I've been out gigging, and everybody around you has fun. But then you're there to play most often as when I'm driving. So you know, and obviously it's always fun to play with the band. I wouldn't do it if I didn't like it. But I guess what I'm trying to say is I don't really see the attraction of thinking, oh, it's a bigger night than any other night, and we have to mark it as such. But maybe I'm just getting grumpier as I get older, I suppose, is probably a little bit creeping in there. But that's the way I feel at the moment.
I think that's totally legitimate, and also we're at an age now where a pub being too crowded is very much a bad thing. So yeah, no, I'm with you there to a certain extent. I don't have to do the gigging or anything, but yeah, it's often overrated. So fair enough.
So we've covered where we were on the night. One of the massive things around the Millennium was to do with the Millennium Bug, or the Y2K problem. And I believe your dad had some story to tell around this.
He did, yes. He was involved in a sort of a small business or a money-making idea to market and sell these kits that you would put on your computer to make them safe from the Millennium Bug. And if anyone can't remember, or if anyone is too young to remember, the Millennium Bug was this idea that because computer clocks were sort of, I don't know, I guess they were automatic, but computers run on their time clock to a certain extent. And so when it turned from 1999 to 2000, if it was a 2-digit clock for the year, it would go from 99 to 00. Mm-hmm. And this would massively confuse the computer. It would think it was 1900, and then everything would start to fail. And it was a genuine concern, a massive concern. I was reading up about it. Like, governments were spending billions on trying to combat this or prevent this great collapse. And, you know, some people were even saying it was going to be like an apocalypse, a computer-led apocalypse, because everything was going to crash, you know, like air traffic control and all that sort of stuff. So my dad, with his brother, kind of got into this small-scale business. And I actually asked him about this because I couldn't really remember. And I've got his message, his recollections of the event, and I will read that out now. My brother and a friend from New Zealand got hold of some computer cards that were supposed to protect systems from the Millennium Bug. My role was admin. I bought sticky address labels, brackets, still using them today, envelopes, and I made a spreadsheet which remained largely unsullied by data. Sold only a few, so was eager for chaos to follow the midnight chimes. Alas, nothing happened. I felt like the bloke with the end of the world is nigh sign who'd spent months walking up and down the high street. All very disappointing. So, yes, it was a small scale and ultimately, unsurprisingly, well, I say unsurprisingly, in hindsight, unsurprisingly, wasn't really worth the time and effort because there was no great crash or disaster, and they only sold a few of the things anyway. Mm-hmm. But I do remember the boxes being around on a house for quite a while. and yeah.
Yes, I mean, I had a look into some of the problems that occurred on the 1st of January 2000. I'll read out some of the ones which have been documented here. In Australia, bus ticket validation machines in 2 states failed to operate. In Japan, at 2 minutes past midnight, the telecommunications carrier Osaka Mediaport found errors in the date management part of the company's network. The problem was fixed by 43 minutes past 2 in the morning and no services were disrupted. Mm-hmm. In the United States, 150 slot machines stopped working. So,
I mean, that's pretty serious if you're a gambling addict. So let's not forget them.
Pretty small beer, in terms of the problems suffered. But it's interesting that your dad makes reference there to being the guy with the placard saying the end is nigh and then nothing happening, because I did want to make mention of Carlos Roa as we chat about this. Do you know who Carlos Roa is?
No, I don't. No.
You will definitely have experienced Carlos Roa. He was the goalkeeper for Argentina in the 1998 World Cup. So he saved David Batty's penalty, and I think Paul Ince's penalty as well in the penalty shootout when Argentina knocked England out of France 98. I'm just going to read you something here. South American goalkeeper Carlos Roa decided not to wait until his playing days were over before making a life-changing decision. A devout Seventh-day Adventist, the former Argentina goalkeeper temporarily quit the game at 29 to prepare for the apocalypse. Roa, better known to England fans for saving the fifth and final penalty from David Batty to knock Glenn Hoddle's team out of the 1998 World Cup in France, believed the world would end at the coming of the new millennium and retreated to a farm in rural Argentina to preach while waiting for the four horsemen to arrive. The year 2000 is going to be difficult, Roa declared. In the world, there is war, hunger, plague, much poverty, floods. No difference, really, from today. I can assure you that those people who don't have a spiritual connection with God and the type of life that he wants will be in trouble. Thankfully, Roa wasn't as talented at soothsaying as he was at saving penalties, and he soon returned to football with his former club, Mallorca. So there you go. Carlos Roa, our international goalkeeper, retired at the age of 29 because he believed the world was going to end in January 2000.
Yeah.
And that's always stuck in my mind. Whenever the millennium is mentioned, I always think of Carlos Roa. That fact has never left me.
If you'd said that he was from New Zealand, I would have thought maybe he was his mysterious third partner in my dad and his uncle's Millennium Bug business. But no, not if he was Argentinian. Well, fair play to him for coming back into football and not just being too embarrassed to leave his farm after that. But, sometimes you've got to hedge your bets a bit. Mm-hmm. I also did read the same things you read about what happened on midnight on the 31st. And one thing that you didn't mention was that in Onagawa in Japan, an alarm sounded at a nuclear power plant at 2 minutes after midnight, which must have really scared the hell out of the locals, you would have thought. They've already got into this heightened state of awareness and potentially panic about the turn of the millennium, and then the nuclear power plant alarm starts going off. So that must have been pretty freaky. But then also I did see this thing that in the US, as a direct result of the Y2K glitch at midnight, computers at ground control ceased processing information from an unspecified number of spy satellites. And similar to the one you mentioned, they did fix it within 3 hours using a contingency plan. But it still kind of shows that things did go wrong and there was this sort of potential, and they apparently had a contingency plan, so they did need to prepare for it to some extent. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you also saw this on Wikipedia, but it said the total cost of work done in preparation for Y2K was estimated at over $300 billion. So loads of work was put into preventing stuff. But then also it says that worldwide $308 billion was estimated to have been spent on Y2K remediation. So I'm guessing that means that they did have to spend a lot of money fixing things that had gone slightly odd or awry. So
they spent just as much before the event as they did after.
Yeah, but presumably if they hadn't spent that 300 million in prep, maybe the remediation would have been way, way more. Or maybe there had been an apocalypse, It only takes one gambling machine to go wrong for, the butterfly effect. We could all be dead by now if it wasn't for that preparation cost.
One thing I was interested to learn is that there have been similar issues since. So there was a year 2010 problem. I'm not going to get into specifics here because it's far too technical and boring for this podcast. But there was also a year 2022 problem, which is obviously is this year as we speak, which caused issues with the Microsoft Exchange server. So there was that. We've experienced it this year, and the next one is due for year 2038. There will be a year 2038 problem. So we've got 16 years until the next one. So we'll have to spend billions of pounds in order to get ready for that, no doubt.
Yeah, start stocking up on your beans and your guns. Did you also come across a thing that the year 10,000 problem, which is like kind of a similar sort of thing, but because all of our date things are 4 digits, so when we get to the year 10,000 it'll suddenly be 5 digits. And I came across this organization called the Long Now Foundation, which is among other things is preparing for this by now starting to use a 5-digit date, so it's the year 02022 or 23 if it's after the turn of the new year. And I just think that's incredibly forward thinking, isn't it? They really are getting prepared just 6,000 years in advance. They're starting to get ready, and you never can be too prepared. A stitch in time saves
10,000.
Yeah.
Fail to prepare to fail, as they say.
Exactly.
But I have to say, I'm not too worried about that.
No, I think we've got far bigger problems before the year 10,000 than the date format.
there won't be a year 10,000 anyway. Let's be honest.
Yeah, not a human year anyway.
And we've already seen forward to the year 3000 with Busted, of course, where we're all going to be underwater anyway.
Yeah.
And this is coming true as we speak. We will all be underwater by then.
That's true, yeah. And your great-great-great-granddaughter will be pretty fine, I think. Is that right?
Yeah, yeah. And Busted's 7th album has gone multi-platinum. So they released their first album in 2001 or 2. So they'll have released 7 albums in 1,000 years. Even by the Stone Roses standard. That's slow output. The other huge cultural icon around the turn of the millennium was the Millennium Dome. Still with us, of course, as the O2. Did you get to visit the Millennium Dome?
No, I never did, and I still never have, even in its O2 guise.
Well, I was lucky enough to be able to do that. I suppose I was in really the prime age category because, as I said, I was in year 6 at the time, or maybe it was a tail end of year 5. I can't remember, but I would have been 10 or 11 going to visit the Millennium Dome. And I have to be honest, I can't remember too much about it. The only real thing I can remember is going into a big cinema room and watching a half-hour bespoke episode of Blackadder.
Oh yeah, of course,
called Blackadder Back and Forth, which had been specially commissioned for the Millennium Dome. So you've seen this, have you?
I've seen it on TV. Yeah, it's really good from what I remember.
It's not too bad. I've had a look at some of the information behind it, and it was a bit of a strained production. So they managed to get most of the cast back, but it was beset by internal politics, and Sky had paid for it to be made, but then the BBC were arguing that they wanted to be able to be the first to show it on TV because Blackadder had been a BBC production all along. I remember getting a tie-in program with some of the money that I'd been given to go and get some treats at the Dome, and it had most of the script in it, or all of the script. It was only a half-hour episode, and a few other bits and pieces as well. But yeah, that really is all I can remember from my visit to the Dome. I can't really remember anything else about it apart from that. So clearly, it didn't leave a massive dent in my psyche.
It was sort of reappraised, wasn't it? I think initially it was seen as a big flop and a waste of money, but then I think in later years it was maybe seen as becoming a bit more worth it. I suppose when it became a big gig venue, maybe, I don't know, but I never really knew what was going on in there, and I think maybe a lot of people felt like that, and that's why it wasn't as popular as it should have been. But sounds like you didn't have a particularly life-changing experience there.
No, I don't think so. I remember there being a big buzz when they put the Millennium Dome on the EastEnders opening titles as well. And I remember that was deemed newsworthy at the time. But yeah, my trip to the Millennium Dome, I'm glad to be able to say I went, but not very memorable, it would appear.
No. Did you go to the Millennium Bridge? That may have been more memorable. The wobbly Millennium Bridge that started shaking because it had too many people on it. Do you remember that?
I've been across it since. I have been there in my adult life, but not as a child, I'm afraid. Not when it was opened at the time. Neither have I ever been on the London Eye. Was that a Millennium thing?
I associate it with that. Yeah. But I'm not sure exactly when it opened. I've not been on that either. I've not been on the 3 main London Millennium landmarks, but yeah, there you go.
Only one of which now still carries Millennium in its name.
Yeah, that's true. Is it still called the Millennium Bridge then?
I think so.
Yeah, it must be, mustn't it? Or the Wobbly Bridge, maybe. Shall we move on to what was going on in the world around this time in terms of sort of politics and local events and
yes, please, mate. What have you got?
Such like. I'm sure most people will know this or remember this, but in the UK, Tony Blair and New Labour were still in their first term, so they were sort of just getting going. I think the first of their 3 terms, if I remember correctly. Bill Clinton was the president of the US for not much longer, I think, because I think George Bush took over in 2000 or 2001. But Boris Yeltsin resigned as Russian president, which led, of course, to the rather unpopular Vladimir Putin taking over right at that time. I think it was like right at the end of 1999, which is weird when you think about how much was changed that we've been talking about since that time. But Putin is still there. But I went onto a website called the British Newspaper Archive, and I was looking to see what the headlines were in and around the local regions and some of the national headlines as well. I didn't pay to sign up for this website, so I can only, unfortunately, see a small thumbnail of the front page. So I can only see the headline. We'll have to extrapolate anything further from the story just from that. But I think it's kind of a nice way, or an interesting way, of measuring the moods across the various provinces of the UK going into the new millennium. So starting off with the Daily Record up in Scotland, they were in buoyant spirits because their headline was "Now we party like it's 1999." Whereas the Bucks Examiner and the Tamworth Herald both had the same headline, and they were a bit more reflective. So they went with "Farewell to the 20th century." Whereas on the other hand, the Staines Informer were more forward-looking, and they went for "Welcome to the 21st century." So you can see how different regions are. Some are more reflective, they're looking back, more wistful, and some are like, let's just plough straight ahead, let's get on with this. And then there was the Burton Mail. They were a bit more panicked because they went with Millennium Red Alert. So a bit more worried up in the East Midlands. The Ealing Leader wasn't interested at all, or either wasn't interested or just wasn't aware of the new millennium, because they went with "Parking Zone of Shambles" on the 31st. And I don't know what on earth was going on in Hoddesdon and Broxbourne, because their local newspaper, the Mercury, went with "Couple leap from smouldering bed." And one can only imagine what was going on in that bedroom to lead to a smouldering bed. But
Blimey.
Drama in the bedroom on the new Millennium Eve. And then in terms of national newspapers, the ever measured and nuanced Daily Mirror went with "Mad Mick," which related to the attack on the Beatle George Harrison the day before, because he'd been attacked by someone who'd been suffering from paranoid schizophrenia. Had attacked him in his home, which was a bit freaky and unpleasant. But of course, George did survive. But that was what they were talking about. It's the same for the Sun and the Express, actually. And then overseas, there wasn't anything that dramatic. The New York Post said "It's here." The LA Times was focusing on Boris Yeltsin stepping down, so sort of not worrying about the frivolity of New Year's Eve. And then there was a couple here that I thought were quite an eerie foreshadowing of the beginning of the new millennium, because the Boston Sun had Algerian accused of bomb plot, and El País in Spain had "The air pirates remain inflexible 1 week after the hijacking." I'm not sure exactly what that relates to, what story that is, but yeah, there's a sort of foreshadowing now of what was going to dominate the news for the start of the new millennium. So a range of stuff going on there around the world, a range of moods. Some people not that interested in the new millennium, others focusing entirely on it. So yeah, there you go.
I think I might be able to solve the mystery of the smouldering bed in Hoddesdon and Broxbourne.
Oh, go on.
This is another "It'll be all right in the 90s" cold case being solved.
Yeah.
Vibrating bed, got to plug it in. Millennium Bug.
Yes, you're right. Yeah.
Grounded in the system.
That was probably
should have bought one of those compliance kits off your dad.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah. Although I'm not sure how you plug your bed into a late 90s desktop PC to put the CD-ROM in, but they probably should have thought about it.
It is a bit of a reach, I suppose. Yeah,
it's one of the things this pod does best, is reaching, so absolutely not going to be mad at you for that. In terms of the arts, I have the chart toppers from the end of 1999 going into 2000. So in the UK, the number one in the pop charts, double A side "I Have a Dream" and "Seasons in the Sun" by Westlife. Which, Stu, is it true? Did this knock Cliff off number one, or?
I don't know if it knocked the Millennium Prayer off number one. I know that there was a race and Cliff really wanted to be number one for the Millennium, but I don't think Millennium Prayer ever reached number one. If I'm right in saying that, I think Westlife had him sort of beaten fair and square, really, on that front.
Yeah, well, thank goodness for small mercies. I mean, it's probably the best thing Westlife have ever done is to keep the Millennium Prayer off the number one spot, because I think you're right, actually. I don't think it ever got to number one. Maybe we should look that up just because we don't want to embarrass ourselves.
I'm sorry. Yeah. I'll do another on-air correction. It did reach number one.
Oh.
The song was beaten to the British Christmas number one single for 1999 by Westlife. It had been number one for the 3 preceding weeks, so it was number one for 3 weeks before Christmas.
Okay.
So he released it too early. There's the problem.
Did, yeah. He did. I wonder if that means he ever got a number one in the 2000s. He probably did. You always hear these things about Cliff having a number one in like 7 separate decades and stuff. But
I think it's albums. I think he's had a number one album in like 8 consecutive decades now, from the 50s onwards.
And then on the other side of the pond in the US, the number one was "Smooth" by Santana featuring Rob Thomas. which was a big song. I remember that. It was number one for 12 weeks in the US, apparently. Never reached number one in the UK. Probably the first time I'd ever come across Santana, and a lot of people my age came across Santana through that, so not bad. And then in terms of movies, in the UK, Stu, I don't know if you know this, what James Bond film was number one at this point in the UK? Can you work it out?
Yes, I think I can, because it must be the one where he parasails down or slides down the outside of the Millennium Dome in the opening.
Yeah,
and that I think is The World Is Not Enough.
Correct. I mean, I can't verify the sliding down the Millennium Dome thing, but you must be right, because it was, it would have been around that time. It would have been in the film for that reason. I think that has that ridiculous scene where he drives really quite far down the street in a speedboat. He sort of jumps out of the docks and drives for a long way in the boat. And it also stars Robert Carlyle and Denise Richards. Denise Richards is a very 90s actor. Right? Or 90s, early 2000s. I don't know where she is now. Probably doing TV or something. But very 90s Bond film there.
Is this also the Bond film where he drives a dead standard BMW saloon?
Oh, it could
instead
be,
of anything with any modicum of
the 750i.
It becomes invisible at one point, and he's driving it from the rear through a mobile phone. I think,
it's got like a remote control or something, which actually you can get now. I think some Teslas or something, you can sort of drive your car out of the parking space from the key. So it was sort of ahead of its time in that way. But he's basically just driving an MI5 company car there, isn't he? They hadn't finished the proper Lotus or Aston Martin in time.
You're gonna have to take a pool car, James, I'm afraid.
Tires are completely bald because people have been ragging it around,
138,000 miles.
And then I think it was a 750i. That's what I think the car was.
I think it was, yeah.
And then in the US, the movie was Any Given Sunday, which is an American football film with Robert De Niro, directed by Oliver Stone. Have you seen this, Stu? It's the sort of film I can imagine Dad of the Pod being very keen on.
Yes, yeah. I think Glyn has seen it. I haven't, but is this the one with the big speech? Is it Al Pacino does a massive speech, and it's a very famous, like, motivational sporting, or is it De Niro?
Robert De Niro. Well, I know it's got Robert De Niro, and I don't think they're both in it, so it must be.
Righto. I know of it. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, I have seen it once and I found it incredibly boring. There was about an hour in the middle where literally nothing happened. And it's quite surprising because I do really like Oliver Stone films, but the one time I saw that I didn't like it. If anyone was remotely interested in what my opinion was on it. But they were the number ones in the UK and the US. If you're listening from somewhere else, I realise I've focused very much on those two countries, as we often are guilty of doing on this podcast. But if you know what was number one in other countries, if it was anything out of the ordinary, let us know. But they're the number ones. So Stu, in terms of looking forward to 2023 and moving out of 2022, would you say you're more of in terms of your attitude, are you more Bucks examiner, or are you the Staines informer, or are you a bit more panicked like the Burton Mail, do you think?
I'm a Hoddesdon and Broxbourne. My bed is smouldering.
Okay.
No, I always like to look forward, never back. It's not something that I live by. It's something I find difficult to live by. But I always try my best to do that, and I always look at a new year as a new opportunity to to do some new things and broaden horizons. So looking forward to the new year. There's already a few things on the list that I'm going to be doing, which I'm really looking forward to. And one thing that I have in my mind for the coming year is no resolutions, only change. So
Nice.
where I'm looking to do things and change certain things. There's no point having resolutions that you're not going to stick to. Just do it and make sure it gets done. That's my advice to everyone listening as well. If you're going to have a New Year's resolution, don't have a New Year's resolution. Just make the change.
Yeah, spot on. I'm more along the lines of the people of Ealing, in that I'm more interested in local parking than I am about the change of the year. So that's
it's
where
an
I
important
stand.
subject. It's a very important subject.
Absolutely.
We can't lose sight of these things. Definitely not. So that was our whistle stop tour through the Millennium. So Alex, to finish, I'm interested in knowing how much you think the world has changed in the 22 years that we've had since 2000, and comparing that to the 22 years previously to 2000. So from 1978 to 2000, the changes we saw then in culture, technology, politics, etc., and then the changes we've seen since 2000. I'm generally of the opinion that things have slowed somewhat
Hmm.
in the second half of that. What do you think?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it feels like the changes from 78 to 2000 were massive, but then I wasn't sort of conscious. I wasn't alive or I was too young to really recognize a lot of those changes. But it really feels like they must have done. The 70s feels so different to 2000 in terms of like culture and politics to a certain extent. So I agree that I think we have slowed down a bit, but there have been a lot of sort of technical advancements in that time. I know we had the internet at the end of the 90s, but it's become completely ubiquitous, isn't it? It's everywhere now, much faster. Everything's online. So that's a big change. Culture is relatively the same. There's not been any massive sort of developments in genres, like rock music and pop music in the 70s compared to 2000 was completely different, but now it's not so massive. But yeah, I think it has slowed down a bit, but in terms of politics, it's not improved, has it? We haven't reached this great peaceful utopia. It's probably more chaotic than it was in 2000. Yeah, I don't think the human race and humankind is looking in any better shape, and the environment definitely isn't. But that's a very negative note to end on for me. But that's unfortunately the truth of it as far as I can see. What about you? How much do you think it's changed?
Well, we'll look at this again in another 22 years if we're all still alive, and we'll have a look at the rate of change will probably have slowed down to nothing by then.
Yeah.
No, I think it's I think the difference between the two periods is massive. I mean, if you think of where, as you say, in 1978, there was no internet, communications were still basic, television was still only a few channels, and then you get to 2000, which is 22 years later, the internet's commonplace, satellite TV, etc., and then from 2000 to here, we still have the internet, we still have satellite TV, but it's become a bit more efficient and more usable, and as you say, it's become ubiquitous. But I think that rate of change is slowing and probably will continue to slow. I'm not sure where the next huge technological advancement is going to come from that's going to change everybody's lives. I mean, in 1978, everybody probably still thought that we'd have hover cars in the year 2000 and that sort of thing. And obviously that didn't happen and still hasn't happened. But we can only wait and see. And the main thing is, as you say, with the environment the way it is, I think we can only keep our fingers crossed that we're all still here in another 22 years and we have somewhere to call home and be able to live our lives in a full way. Yeah,
we've got some hard work to be done, that's for sure. Well, it's a sort of a sobering way to end the episode, isn't it? And the year, if you're listening, bang on New Year's Eve. Like I've said a couple of times already, if you have any thoughts on this topic or where you think we're going to be going in the future, and how much change has happened in these previous 22 years, then do let us know on the usual channels, which you can find on our link tree, which is linktr.ee/allright90s podcast. All the links to our social media and where you can listen to us are on there. So please do get in contact and let us know your thoughts.
Please do. We'd love to hear from you. This is going to be our last episode for a little while. I'm not sure we're going to be back in the usual 2 weeks, are we?
Yes. Yeah. We might have our first ever holiday from the pod after a year and a half. How long have we been doing this for? Yeah, a year and a half or something.
Yeah, something like that. So we have earned a few weeks off. But obviously we will be back with a lot more content for you in 2023. Okay, so it just remains to say thanks once again to all of you for listening, getting in touch with us throughout the year. It's been an absolute pleasure to produce the podcast for you, and thank you for all your engagement. We'll be back in a few weeks. Until next time, enjoy the New Year celebrations. It's goodbye from me. I'm off to get some 2023 novelty glasses.
And it's goodbye from me. Thanks for listening in 2022 and see you next year.
Bye for now. Happy New Year.
Bye.